know what's strange about loneliness? It has a sound, not silence, but something thinner, emptier, like the whisper of wind brushing over forgotten places. I've heard that sound for 3 winters now. My name is Scout. I am a dog who survived them all. Frost, hunger, and the kind of waiting that carves its own kind of scar. I wasn't always alone. Once there was her, Lily. She smelled like rain and wildflowers, and she laughed like sunlight. We lived in a cabin at the edge of the forest, where the snow fell soft and kind, and her voice made every night warm. Until the day she left. No words, no warning. Just the faint echo of her footsteps and the smell of tears that even time couldn't erase. The cabin was quiet after that, too quiet. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath, as if afraid to disturb the emptiness she left behind. I slept on the porch for days, waiting for her to return, nose pointed toward the road, ears tuned for her voice. I didn't understand why the sun rose without her, why the world kept going when everything in me had stopped. The first night she didn't come back, I told myself she'd return in the morning. The second night, I told myself she was lost and needed me to wait. By the third, I stopped telling myself anything. I just waited. The first winter was full of disbelief. Snow came early that year, coating the trees like ghosts of promises. I waited by the path that led to the road, certain she'd appear through the fog any moment. Every crunch of snow made my ears twitch. Every shadow looked like her coat, but days stretched into nights, and nights into months. The world turned white, and my world turned empty. I learned the language of survival, the bite of frozen air, the ache of an empty belly, the sound of my own heartbeat keeping me company. I learned to dig beneath the fence for shelter, to steal warmth from my own fur, to find the places where the wind couldn't reach me. But I never learned how to stop waiting. Even when the frost bit into my paws and the cold turned my breath to crystals, I stayed near the cabin. It wasn't just a place, it was her scent, her laughter, her promise that we'd always be together. I held on to that promise the way a starving dog holds on to a bone. It was all I had left. By the time the second winter came, the forest no longer recognized me. I was thinner, slower, quieter. The people who sometimes hiked by called me a ghost. They'd leave scraps, bits of bread, pieces of meat, small offerings of pity. Their voices were kind, but their eyes were full of the same thing every stranger's eyes carry. Distance. I'd sniff their hands, take their food, and retreat before they could reach out. None of them smelled like her. None of them said my name the way she did. The world was full of sounds, but none of them were hers. Still, I stayed close to the cabin, because love, once known, has a scent that never truly fades. It lingers in the corners of rooms, in the cracks of wood, in the soil where tears once fell. It becomes part of the air itself. That was what kept me alive. The smell of her, faint but eternal, like the ghost of spring buried under snow. By the third winter, I stopped dreaming. Dreams are dangerous when hope is thin. They play tricks on you. They make you hear footsteps that aren't there, see faces that belong to memories. But that morning, the morning everything changed, I smelled something new, faint, familiar. The wind carried it from the porch, where the snow was packed in uneven layers. I followed it, my heart thudding in my chest like a drum calling me home. Beneath the same stone where she used to sit, there was a folded piece of paper. I pawed at it gently, afraid it might vanish like everything else I'd loved. The edges were damp, the ink smeared, but the scent, oh, the scent, it was hers. I pressed my nose against it and felt the tremor that ran through my whole body. It was real. It was her. The note smelled like tears and hope, like the faint trace of her hands that used to hold my face when I was just a pup. And on that paper, written in shaky, faded letters, were 7 words. Scout, if you're still here, I'm coming home. The words didn't make sense at first. Home? She was my home. She couldn't come back to herself. But as I stared at the paper, I felt something shift inside me. a warmth that had nothing to do with the weak winter sun. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for nothing. I was waiting for her again. I guarded that paper like it was bone, like it was her heartbeat itself. The snow fell again that night, covering everything except the spot where I lay. I didn't move. I couldn't. The cold seeped into my fur, but the fire in my chest burned brighter. Because for the first time in 3 winters, the cold didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Days passed. The forest seemed to sense my change. The crows that once mocked me kept their distance. The wind softened, and even the trees seemed to whisper gentler songs. I watched the road from dawn till dusk, nose to the air, ears sharp for footsteps. Every sound sent my heart racing. Sometimes it was just the echo of my own hope bouncing back through the woods. Sometimes it was nothing at all. But I didn't care. She had left a note. She had remembered. That was enough to keep me breathing. But as weeks turned to months and snow fell again in thicker blankets, doubt began to creep in like frost through broken windows. Maybe the note wasn't new. Maybe she had written it years ago, before she left for good. Maybe she was gone, truly gone, and this was just the forest's cruel trick. A piece of the past blown back to me by the wind to remind me of what I'd lost. I tried not to believe it, but when hope is fragile, it breaks easily under the weight of silence. I started pacing around the cabin again, tracing the same paths I'd worn into the snow over the years. Each paw print felt like a question. Where are you? Why did you leave me? Do you still remember my name? The nights grew colder again. My ribs pressed against my skin like the frame of an old house about to give way. Still I stayed, because leaving would mean giving up the last place she might look for me. I couldn't do that, not when her scent was still in the wood, not when her promise still echoed in that note. Some nights I'd dream of her voice, calling me from the edge of the woods. I'd wake with my ears perked, heart racing, only to find the same endless snow. But on the night before spring, something changed again. The wind shifted. It carried with it something warmer, something alive. Footsteps, faint at first, then clearer, and then her voice. Scout! Just one word, soft and trembling, but it shattered the stillness like lightning across the frozen lake. I froze, afraid to move, afraid that if I did, the sound would disappear. But it didn't. It came again, closer, breaking through the years that had buried it. I ran then, faster than I had in years, snow exploding under my paws. My heart pounded, lungs burned, and when I reached the edge of the clearing, I saw her. She was older now, thinner, her hair streaked with silver. But it was her. Lily. My Lily. I didn't bark. I couldn't. I just stared, trembling, as she fell to her knees in the snow, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh, Scout," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You're still here." I stumbled toward her, every bone aching, and when her arms wrapped around me, the world finally made sense again. Her scent filled my lungs. Her heartbeat thudded against my ear. She was real. She was home. She pressed her face into my fur and whispered, "I thought you were gone. I thought I'd lost you forever, but I hadn't gone anywhere. I'd been right here, waiting for her to come home." She took me with her that day, not back to the old cabin, but to somewhere new, somewhere warm, with walls that didn't creak in the wind and floors that smelled of soap instead of damp wood. Her hands trembled as she clipped my old collar around my neck, the same one I'd worn as a puppy. She'd polished the buckle and mended the strap with careful stitches. Inside was a new tag, shiny and bright, etched with words I couldn't read but could feel in my bones. "Forever home, Scout and Lily." She whispered it aloud as she fastened it. "No more winters alone," she said, her voice breaking. "No more waiting." My heart thudded once, hard like it was trying to leap out of my chest. All at once, the weight of 3 winters lifted, leaving me hollow and light. For the first time in years, I felt something like safety, something like belonging. The first night back with her was strange. The house was smaller than the cabin had been, but warmer. There was a soft bed in the corner just for me, but I couldn't bring myself to use it. I curled up on the floor near her feet instead, needing to feel her presence with every breath. She moved differently now, slower, more careful, but she still hummed while she cooked, a faint echo of the melody she'd once filled the cabin with. I pressed my head against her leg as she stirred a pot of soup, closing my eyes. Her scent was stronger now, closer, no longer just a memory caught in wood and paper. It wrapped around me like a blanket. When she crouched down to stroke my fur, her fingers lingered on the scars along my ribs. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should never have left you." I leaned into her hand, forgiving her in the way only dogs know how. The past didn't matter. Only now mattered. But even as my body healed, my mind clung to the note. It sat on the table where she'd left it, edges still damp from snow. She'd framed it in her hands like a fragile thing, lips moving silently as she read it again and again. I couldn't understand the words, but I could feel their power. That small piece of paper had been a lifeline thrown across 3 winters, binding us together when everything else had fallen apart. Now it lay between us like proof that promises can survive even the coldest seasons. She touched it often, like a talisman. Sometimes at night, I'd watch her sitting at the table with a note and a pen, writing in a worn notebook. Her lips would tremble as she wrote, but her eyes shone with something fierce and new. "We'll write it all down, Scout," she'd murmur. "Everything we lost, everything we found again." I'd wag my tail softly, as if to tell her I understood. As the days passed, a new rhythm began to form. Morning walks through the thawing forest, afternoons by the fire, evenings where she told me stories while I dozed at her feet. The hunger faded. My coat thickened again, glossy under her brush. The nightmares that had haunted my sleep for years began to loosen their grip. But sometimes in the quiet moments, I'd catch her staring at me with a look I couldn't name, a mixture of guilt, wonder, and something like fear. She'd reach out to touch my collar, then pull her hand back, as if she still wasn't sure I was real. I knew that look. It was the same look I'd seen in my reflection on frozen ponds, the look of someone afraid to believe in hope again. She'd been through her own kind of winter, I realized. Maybe she'd been waiting too. It was on one of those quiet evenings that she told me the truth. We were sitting by the fire, her notebook open in her lap, my head resting on her knee. The light flickered across her face, softening the lines time had carved there. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling as it stroked my fur. "Scout," she whispered, "I never wanted to leave you." Her voice cracked, and for a moment she couldn't go on. "They took me away," she said finally. "I got sick. I had to go where they could help me. I thought—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought you wouldn't survive without me." She laughed then, a small broken sound. "But you did. You waited. All this time you waited." She pressed her forehead to mine, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I came back for you. I promised myself if I could, I'd come back. And you were here. You were here," I licked her face, tasting the salt of her tears. In that moment, I understood. She hadn't abandoned me. She'd been fighting her own battles, carrying her own winters. We had both survived. From that night on, something shifted between us. She stopped looking at me like a ghost. She started laughing again, real laughter, the kind that shakes the walls. She began inviting me into her world instead of just feeding me at its edges. We walked through town together, her hand resting lightly on my back. People stopped to stare at us, their eyes soft with recognition, as if they could see the invisible thread connecting us. She didn't hide my scars. She didn't hide hers either. And slowly, as spring crept over the world, we learned how to live together again. She taught me new routines. I taught her the comfort of silent companionship. We built a new home out of the pieces of our old lives, not perfect, but ours. But the note never lost its power. It stayed on the mantel above the fireplace, framed now in simple wood. Visitors would ask about it, and she'd smile, her eyes misty. "That's our story," she'd say. "That's how I found my dog again." But I knew the truth. It wasn't how she found me. It was how we found each other. The note had been a bridge thrown across time, but the real miracle was that we both had the strength to walk across it. Sometimes at night, when the fire burns low and the world is quiet, she reads it aloud again. Scout, if you're still here, I'm coming home. Her voice softens on the last words, and she looks at me with something like awe. You waited, she says. I thump my tail against the floor. Of course I did. That's what dogs do, but also, that's what love does. She began writing more notes after that, not for me, but for herself. Little scraps of paper tucked into jars and drawers, each one a promise to keep going, to hold on, to remember what matters. Sometimes she'd let me watch as she wrote them. It helps, she said, smiling faintly. It helps me believe things can get better. I'd lay my head on her knee, eyes half closed, listening to the scratch of her pen. The sound reminded me of snow falling on leaves, soft, steady, full of possibility. She didn't know it, but those notes helped me too. They were proof that she was staying, that she was building a life where I belonged. The seasons turned slowly, as they always do. Snow melted, grass pushed up through the thaw. My paws no longer cracked from the cold. My belly no longer ached with hunger. My nights were filled with warmth instead of wind. But even as the world softened, I never forgot those 3 winters. They had carved me into something different. Stronger, yes, but also gentler. I learned that waiting isn't just an absence. Sometimes waiting is an act of love. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it's an act of faith that gets answered. Now, when I look at her across the room, I see not just the girl who left, but the woman who came back. And I know we're both survivors of the same long winter. Now when I wake, it's to the sound of her humming instead of the wind howling through broken boards. Morning light filters through clean windows, and the air smells of coffee, bread, and safety. I stretch beside the fire, my bones no longer aching, my fur no longer matted by snow. Lily moves quietly through the house, humming some tune I almost remember. The shadows in her eyes are still there, but softer now. We have both learned how to live with our ghosts. She keeps the note framed above the fireplace, the edges browned by time, the ink faint, but those 7 words still shining like a promise. Sometimes she touches the glass when she passes by, and I see her mouth the words, Scout, if you're still here, I'm coming home. It's strange how such small, fragile things can hold entire lives together. That piece of paper kept me breathing through 3 winters. Now it keeps her heart steady through her quiet days. When spring finally came, we walked back to the forest together. The path was muddy and full of new green shoots, pushing up through thawing earth. The old cabin was still there, leaning slightly, roof sagging, but it smelled of rain and time, not loss. Lily stood in the doorway for a long while, her hand resting on the frame. You really waited, she whispered. I wagged my tail, pressing my head against her leg. She smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks, and for the first time the past didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a story we had survived. She picked up the red ribbon from the broken fence, faded now, nearly falling apart, and tied it to my collar beneath the new tag. For luck, she said softly. We stayed there until sunset, watching the forest breathe again, the sky turning gold and pink. The cabin wasn't our home anymore, but it was where our love had learned to endure. It felt right to say goodbye. We walked home slowly that night. The moon rose full and silver, and the fields shimmered with frost that wasn't cruel this time, just beautiful. When we reached the porch, Lily sat down beside me and looked out at the stars. You know, Scout, she said, her voice thoughtful, I used to think love was something that happened once, that when you lost it, that was it. She paused, her hand finding my fur. But you taught me that love is what you do, not what you feel. You kept waiting, even when it hurt. I leaned against her, listening to the steady rhythm of her heart. She smiled. You make me brave, she said. And for the first time, I understood that I hadn't just been waiting to be found. I had been waiting to help her find herself. The seasons kept turning, and our lives unfolded in quiet, ordinary ways. We planted flowers in the yard. We mended the fence together. When summer came, she'd sit outside reading while I chased dragonflies through tall grass. Sometimes children from town would come by to play with me. They'd ask about the note, and she'd tell them our story in her gentle voice. Scout waited for me, she'd say. He believed I was coming back, even when everyone else thought I was gone. And because he believed, I did come back. They'd listen with wide eyes, petting my head, and I'd rest my chin on their knees, content. Hope is something you can pass on, I think, like warmth from one body to another. That's what we were doing, passing on warmth. At night, when the house grows quiet and the crickets begin their song, I lie beside her bed and think about those winters. I don't remember the hunger or the pain anymore. Not really. What I remember is the waiting, the stubborn heartbeat of hope that refused to stop, the sound of her laughter echoing through my dreams, the scent of her coat when she first knelt beside me in the snow. Those memories are stitched into me like scars, but they don't hurt now. They shine. Sometimes when she can't sleep, she reaches down to rest her hand on my head. Still here, boy? She whispers. I nuzzle her palm and answer. Always, always still here. You know what I've learned after all this time? Love doesn't vanish when it's left in the cold. It just waits for someone to come back and warm it again. It hides in the smallest things. A smell, a sound, a scrap of paper tucked under a stone. People think they need grand gestures, but sometimes it's just a quiet promise that keeps you alive. Lily and I don't talk about those winters anymore. We don't need to. Every look, every touch, every quiet evening beside the fire carries the weight of all we survived. The world can be cruel, yes, but it can also be kind. Sometimes it gives you back what you thought you'd lost forever. I'm older now. My muzzle is gray, and my steps are slower. But I'm not afraid of the cold anymore. When the first snow falls, I sit by the window and watch it drift across the yard, soft and silent. Lily brings me a blanket and smiles. You still love the snow, she says. I wag my tail. How could I not? It reminds me of her voice calling my name through the storm, of the moment I learned that love can survive anything. When I close my eyes, I can still hear her saying it. Scout. And it still feels like the warmest sound in the world. Sometimes when she writes her letters, she reads them aloud to me. They're not about me, not exactly, but they all carry the same heartbeat. To anyone who's waiting, she writes, don't give up. Sometimes love comes back when you least expect it. I listen quietly, my tail thumping once or twice against the floor. I know what she means. I am her proof. We are each other's proof. The fire crackles, and the old note glows softly in its frame above the mantel, golden in the light. The words are barely visible now, but we don't need to read them anymore. We live them every day. Tonight, as I settle into my bed by the fire, I hear her humming again, the same song she used to sing in the cabin all those years ago. Outside, snow begins to fall, thick and slow, wrapping the world in peace. I close my eyes, my body heavy with contentment. Somewhere deep inside, I feel her hand rest gently on my fur. Good night, Scout, she whispers. My tail gives one last wag. The house creaks softly. The wind sighs against the windows, and everything smells of warmth, of bread, wood smoke, and home. This is what love sounds like when it finally finds its voice. This is what family feels like when it's chosen, when it's fought for, when it's real. The note that once kept me alive lies framed above us, a relic of pain transformed into hope. And as the fire hums low and my breathing slows, I know that we both made it through the long winter. Love waited for us, and we were brave enough to find it again.